The older I get, the less I like big crowds. Except when it's here in this community. And then I love it. But crowds of people can be incredibly inspiring and beautiful and holy, and crowds of big people can be extremely threatening and intimidating and menacing and frightening. And I imagine that whether actually in a crowd or seeing images of a crowd, we've all experienced both. So some of the protests that have happened on the campuses in the last couple of years have been extremely frightening and threatening, especially for Jewish students. And some of the protests in other places have been inspiring and hopeful. Everybody I know in Israel was... hi, Lila. Oh, Shabbat Shalom. Pretty much everybody I know in Israel on Wednesday was at the protests in Jerusalem outside the Prime Minister's house, protesting against the resumption of the violence against the government's attempt to fire both the head of the Shin Bet and the head of the Attorney General. And of course not everybody in Israel was. And some of you may have seen the very disturbing news report that a very far-right taxi driver actually drove into the crowd and injured one of the protesters. And so we see these kinds of things happening, where there's so much division and divisiveness on our streets, whether in Israel or here, with people who have strong convictions about what they consider to be true. And what makes a gathering a community and what makes a gathering a mob? And that is a distinction that I think is really important, the difference between a community and a mob, because in Hebrew it's really the same word, and it's all connected to Kehillah. Because if we look at last week's Parsha, a part of the Parsha that we didn't actually read, when the people are basically becoming a mob, an anguished mob who are distraught because Moshe hasn't come back and they want to worship a golden calf, the Torah says, Vayikahel ha'am al Aharon. Vayikahel. They gathered themselves al Aharon. Like literally means on Aharon. Like they kept an angry mob coming to Aaron saying, Moshe is not coming back, make us a god that we can really worship, but something we can see and feel and hear. Right? And there's this sort of very menacing effect to it. If you look at the beginning of this week's Parsha, it's exactly the same letters with different vowels on them. And it says, Vayakhel Moshe et kol adat b'nei Yisrael. The same root meaning, the same root, not the same meaning, the same root, different vowels, which is Moshe gathered the people together. He gathered the people together, and it says, Et kol adat b'nei Yisrael. Edah is another word for gathering. Kehillah is a word for gathering. And they mean similar things, but slightly different. In fact, and I mentioned this last night, the Slonimer Rebbe says that the word Adat B'nai Yisrael, all of the congregation of B'nai Yisrael, is actually the same letters as Da'at, which can mean religion, or it can mean awareness, or it can mean consciousness. So the difference between a Kehillah that's just a gathering of people and an Adat Kol Beit Yisrael is the consciousness, the intent to do good. The problem with that, of course, is that some of the people who gather in what we might perceive to be a mob are themselves considering themselves to be part of a holy community, right? And so it gets what for us might be a mob might be a community. What for us might be a community might be a mob for someone else. And it gets very, very tricky. But I want to talk about it, and I know we're running a bit late, but I want to talk about it in terms that no one knows the time, so it doesn't matter, right?
We're fine.
in terms of the big difference between the way in which the people gather against Aaron and make him build that golden calf, and the way in which the people gather in this week's Parsha to really start the actual full-scale construction of this Mishkan. To understand it, I think we have to really look at the difference between what a golden calf is and what a Mishkan is, right? The golden calf, in the words of Rabbi Shefer Gold, says there is no there. A golden calf is a completely solid object that has no center to it. Its end is its end. Whereas a Mishkan is the absolute opposite. A Mishkan is all about the holiness of the space in the center. Golden calf, there is no center. Mishkan is all about the center. And so it means that the intent and the consciousness, the act of creating one and the act of creating the other is utterly different. So the mob that might get together to make this golden calf come out of the ashes is about worshipping something inanimate that has no there, as opposed to a whole community of people coming together. So much so, as I mentioned at the beginning of the Parsha, when Moshe says, "Die! We got enough! You can stop bringing your things. We got enough to complete this project." And as we will keep saying, that is not true in terms of the Bonei Shalom building project. And we take gifts of any size because it's all about a Kehila Kadosha, a holy community coming together. Everybody has something valuable to bring. Everybody has a gift, however big or small. And that's what happens, that's what we see happening. So much so that the generosity of heart is overflowing and a little bit too much. So on the one hand, we have a Kehila without the Da'at, and we have a Kehila with the Da'at. We have a golden calf, and we have a Mishkan. We have something that has no center and something that is all about getting into the center. And what happens in that center is the possibility of absolute connection with the ultimate transcendent being of the universe, who comes into that space, into that tent of meeting, the Ohel Moed, into that liminal transcendent space. And in order to get there are some extraordinary things that happen, some of which we read about today. One of the most profound for me that I want to just spend a couple of minutes talking about is the description of the copper wash basin, the ki'or. Because the way the Torah describes it says, Vaya'as et hakior nochoshet ve'et kano nochoshet b'marot hatzovot asher tzav'u petach ohel moed. So Betzalel is the subject of this verb. Betzalel, who is the artist-in-chief, made the copper wash basin and its kano, its vessels, all of the things that went with it, that were also made out of copper. And it was made b'marot hatzovot, with mirrors that came from these women who served in the tent of meeting. It doesn't say nashim, which would be the normal Hebrew word for women. It says sovot, which is a feminine plural of a verb that can actually mean about serving in the army. Tzava Hagana Yisrael, right, is the IDF. But in this case it means spiritual service. It's not entirely clear what these women were doing, but they were clearly holy servants of the Holy One and of the Mishkan and of the community. And they brought these mirrors, and the mirrors were used to make or to adorn this copper wash basin. And the copper wash basin was outside the tent of meeting, and anyone who went into the tent of meeting would wash their hands before entering. There is so much to say about these mirrors of the women. And I see Rabbi Chana nodding her head as if to say there is so much to say about this, and we'll maybe open it up a little bit. But to me, it's just so powerful, because if I'm creating these dichotomies, right? So we have golden calf, we have Mishkan, we have a mob, we have a holy community. We also have the ego self and the part of ourselves that is able to let go of the ego in order to be part of a greater good and part of a wider community. There was a term that was actually coined quite a few years ago, which you may have heard about, called self-itis. Self-itis was actually a psychological term that was a response to the culture of people taking selfies, which, I take selfies sometimes, usually when I'm skiing, but the culture of taking selfies and posting them on social media and then waiting to see how many likes you get, right? And that is actually a kind of a disease of self-absorption in a way. And what Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, in talking about self-itis, talks about is the fact that he witnessed he talks about this in one of his essays, that he witnessed in local bookshops that were in his neighborhood in London, like the religious studies section of the bookstores going like this, and all of the self-help sections of the bookstore going like this. As if to say, people became so self-absorbed about how they're going to improve themselves, how they're going to get better, how they're going to work on themselves. And I mean, be fair, like, we all have our version of that, and it's important to know ourselves and to grow. But like religious texts in their purest sense are about how we come together to serve, and how we come together to be in community, and how we come together to support each other and be part of each other. It goes from the I to the we, you could say, right? I mean, I think, we think a lot about pronouns these days. I think one of the most powerful pronouns is our and we. Like the notion that we are part of a we. We're not part of an I. And the self-itis kind of condition might include constantly looking at my self-image, constantly looking in a mirror, constantly seeing how I look physically, how I appear to others to be. And so something about mirrors. And Daniel is still in the week of Shiva, and one of the traditions that we have in a Shiva house is to cover up the mirrors, because it's not about vanity or seeing ourselves, it's about just being raw in what we're feeling. And so there's something about taking mirrors that can be something in which we reflect our self-image and transforming them into something that is used as holy service, something that is used to purify ourselves before we enter into this Ohel Moed, into this tent of meeting, that I think is absolutely powerful and fascinating. And it also links to the classic midrash, which some of you will know, about the fact that the women refused to give their jewelry in the construction of the golden calf. The men literally pulled it out of their ears. They pulled it off their bodies to say, yeah, we're gonna... It's like a horrible part of that kind of mob mentality. And according to the Midrash, the women didn't participate. And yet here, the women, and by the way, the Parsha, in parts of the Parsha that we didn't read, talk a lot about the women who participated and who had the artisan women who had Chacham Lev, who were wise in their hearts. But the fact that the women are now giving these mirrors, and the other midrash, which is like the only reason that the Israelites were able to multiply when they were in slavery in Egypt, was also because of the mirrors. A story in the Talmud about the women using mirrors to somehow, when the men were just so exhausted from their slave labor and had no desire, no sexual desire, no desire to procreate, thinking only negatively and not thinking about the future, the women used the mirrors to get their husbands actually to, so that their generations could continue. And so in a sense, those same mirrors now become part of the Mishkan. And there's this way in which an object that is used for self-absorption becomes an object for a higher purpose, for community. So I just want to draw those things together. We have a mob and a Kihila Kadosha, a holy gathering, as opposed to a mob mentality. We have the stark difference between a Mishkan, a place that's all about the center and going into that place of the center where we have the possibility to connect to the divine, and the golden calf that has no center. We have self-absorption and giving up the tools that might be used to self-absorption to the greater good of the community. I've now totally forgotten what I wanted to say. Or maybe I just said it. It's the whole notion of being part of a community that is, yes, personal growth has to be part of a community, but it's personal growth within this context of like, how can I show up? How can I serve? How can I do my part to make this gathering of people not just be a gathering of people, but a holy community of people who are here to elevate, here to serve, here to do the best that we can do, help each other grow, help each other. There's a Hasidic teaching that actually says that the purpose of those mirrors was that the mirrors would be there so that we, rather than reflecting on all of the terrible things about our neighbor, we'd actually, before entering into the Ohel Moed, we'd see a reflection of ourselves and the ways in which we need to change, not the way the other needs to change. So again, not just being self-absorbed, but looking at a mirror as something that can help us grow in the way we need to grow, like self-help. But the point of this parsha, which talks again about the power of Shabbat, again about the power of community, again about what a community can do together when they build something together, when everybody shows up and everybody participates. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs wrote a book which I have not read, which I think we should all get a copy of and read, which is called The Home We Build Together, which is all about what happens when a community build a space together. I don't know if you've read it, Cass. But he quotes from it extensively in this collection called I Believe, which are all essays on the Parsha that are connected to what he believes. And he says, I believe that creating community takes hard work and that few things in life are more worthwhile. Building something with others, I discover the joy of becoming part of something greater than I could ever achieve alone. That's what it's all about. That's what this Parsha is about. That's what all of these Parshas have been about. That's what it's about to be part of this amazing community. And as Rav Jacob said earlier, it's not just about what we bring financially or the physical material things. It's also the ways in which we show up, the ways that we serve, the ways that we volunteer. And every single person who's part of a community has something to give, something to offer, ways in which they show up. And that is how we turn just a random gathering of people, a kihila, into kihila that is also kol adat b'nei Yisrael, that is the whole gathering of Israel with that sense of da'at, of religious, spiritual, conscious purpose. I think that's it. Shabbat shalom.